It's live.
All right, greetings everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We want to get started for your time. So, appreciate you guys coming out. Again, we've done this before, and to reach out to you guys for you to come back and do it again, and we appreciate it. We've always got a good response, either in person or online, because we're streaming out together. And so, we appreciate you guys coming out. Informing the community of their rights. So that's why we named it Know Your Rights. And so without further ado, I won't talk too much, but I want to break up a friend of mine, somebody that I've known for a good bit. I know he used to work for the Saginaw Defenders Office, and now I think he has his own practice. No long introduction, just a good friend. Attorney here, Jeremy Tatum.
Always a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the work that Jeff is doing in our community. Some unfamiliar faces, but many that are familiar, so again, thank you. I always appreciate the opportunity to speak and educate our community. For those of you that are watching on our Facebook Live, I encourage you to get involved. I encourage you to really start to learn what your rights are. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jeremy Tatum. I'm a licensed attorney here in Saginaw, Michigan. I have a primary practice in criminal defense. I also do some child, family, and abuse work over on Hospital Road. But everything that I do is about giving back to this community. Right? I don't do this for the likes. I don't do it to be well known. I do it to represent people. Okay? And so it's important that you know your rights, because oftentimes when I'm representing individuals, they tell me things that further tells me that they don't understand what their rights are. Right? So how do you protect yourself when you're out in the community, when you're out with your friends, having a party, having a get together, and you encounter law enforcement? Because most of the time, that's where the issue sees itself. But before I talk about that, I want to kind of paint a picture, because we're going to talk very briefly about the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the Sixth Amendment. And that's primarily where you're going to see your rights being violated, or an attempt being made to exercise your rights, and then you're asserting that law enforcement violated your rights. That may or may not have happened. Okay? So I want to give you a story, just briefly. Some years ago, not many, but a few years ago, I was an undergrad student at Saginaw State University. And ironically, I was studying criminal justice at the time. And I left a night course. I drove down Sheridan Road. I saw people that I knew at the liquor store. And we agreed to go back to their home, which was just right around the corner. By the time we had made it around that corner, I seen lights hit me behind my vehicle. And I looked to my window, there's a gun and flashlight in my face. All right? These are things that change people. Okay? These are the interactions that I see on a daily basis. All right? And so I looked to the window and I asked the officer, what did I do? Okay? And he tells me he needs to step out of the vehicle. I do so. And I again asked, inquired, why did you stop? He says, because your music is loud. And so I looked back in the vehicle and I said, the radio's not on. Okay? I have a choice in that moment whether I'm going to be combative with this officer or if I'm going to allow what he's doing to occur. Okay? Am I seized? Yes. Okay? The officer then proceeds to search me. He then begins to search my vehicle. He asked me what was in my backpack. I said, books. Right? And then he searched my backpack. He didn't ask me could he do it, but he did. Right? And then he allowed me to leave. Now, the people I was with had a few choice words about it. Right? Were my rights violated? Absolutely. Okay. Did the younger Tatum at that time know that? Absolutely not. Okay? And so we see interactions like that. I want to give you some, as we go through these amendments, I want to give you a picture of what this looks like in real life so you know how to search your constitutional rights. So we'll start with the Fourth Amendment. The U.S. Constitution, upheld by the Michigan Constitution, guarantees each and every one of us the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Okay? Which means generally the government actors need a warrant, okay, to intrude upon your papers, persons, houses, or effects. Okay? Unless, and if you know anything about the study of law, there's always the general rule and then there are the exceptions. Okay? Exceptions to the warrant requirement. Consent. If the officer says, can I search you? Can I search your car? Can I take a look in your home? If you say yes, I don't mind, then they don't need to get a warrant. You've consented. You've given up that right, and whatever he or she finds may be thereafter used against you. Okay? One of the common ones we see, incident to a lawful arrest. So there's a search being done, incident to a lawful arrest. You're driving a vehicle, the officer has made, after investigation, a conclusion to make an arrest. They're not going home. They're going to search that vehicle. They're going to do what they call an inventory search. They don't need a warrant. Why do they not need a warrant? Preservation of evidence. They don't want people coming saying, well, I had $100,000 in my car, and now it's missing. So they don't have to go back to a warrant and get a warrant, before they search that vehicle and do what they would sometimes call an inventory search. And again, that kind of dovetails to the automobile exception. That's one of those general rules. If there's something hot and going on, preservation of evidence in a criminal case becomes essential. Okay? And so the officers, in some instances, don't have to go back and get a warrant.
Jim, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
So if you don't give consent and then they still search everything, does that mean that later on if they proceed with charges that maybe it will be that they did violate your rights? Am I understanding correctly?
Hold that thought, we're going to
Okay,
get there.
okay.
Absolutely, we're going to get there. I'm going to write that down, we're going to get there. If they search anyway. All right, and then the one I dislike the most, plain view. All right, if there is firearm in plain view, the officer can look and see it. He doesn't need a warrant. She doesn't need a warrant. It's open and obvious is what we call it. It's plain. Okay, and then exigent circumstances, hot pursuit. Those are more akin to if an individual is fleeing police and then they run into a dwelling. Officers don't have to let you sit there and destroy all the evidence that they believe, right? Assume, arguendo, that there is something being done nefariously. The law says the officer doesn't have to wait to go back and get a warrant because by the time they come back, all the evidence is gone, right? So hot pursuit, exigent circumstances does allow searches to be conducted outside of a warrant. Now, before I give you a hypothetical that answers your if they search anyway, there's always going to be a balance when we get into the court about balancing law enforcement's obligation to enforce the laws, but also protecting their rights, okay? So let me give you a scenario. This is something I know a lot of us have heard, have seen, particularly in this community. Officer conducts a traffic stop. There's a couple of ways things are going to escalate, all right? Sometimes stops occur because law enforcement gets behind. Well, they were following me. They profiled me. They're running a lean. There's case law that says it's in the public view. It's well within the law enforcement function for officers to see if you have insurance. Motor vehicle operation without security insurance is an arrestable offense, okay? But that gives the basis for the stop, for the seizure, okay? And then the officer approaches the vehicle and he asks the individual that's operating the vehicle, do you have a license? One of the most common issues is people people don't have license. If you don't have a license, if you have something criminally going on that's precluding you from getting your license, go to the expungement clinics to clear up your background. Go to Secretary of State and get your license. Driving license suspended, again, is a 93-day misdemeanor. It's an arrestable offense, okay? I wasn't doing anything wrong. You're committing a crime. That's mandated by statute. You're committing a crime, okay? And now the officers start beginning to develop that probable cause to inquire further, at a minimum to arrest, okay? So, to answer your question, most times we're going to hear officers say, well, do you have any drugs, weapons, guns, or knives in your vehicle? And the individual is going to say, I do not. Right? Do you mind if I take a look inside? I do. Right? Because now you're exercising your right to not consent. Okay? The officer, if he has those other scenarios, they're going to ask you to come out of the vehicle. Okay? This is how the rabbit hole starts. Pennsylvania versus Mims is a case a lot of people really need to pay attention to. It's a case that tells us during a traffic stop, law enforcement can ask you out of the vehicle. There's a misnomer, and I know what we see on a day-to-day, that officers don't always ask people out of the vehicle. It's discretionary. Okay? It's discretionary. And when the officer utilizes his or her discretion, based on what they will always call a totality of the circumstances of what his or her experience is telling them, for officer safety, I'm going to ask you out of the vehicle. If you say no, you're now refusing a lawful command. Okay? You're refusing a lawful command. Now, if you decline the search and the officer hasn't made the determination to arrest you, and you're free to go, and he searches anyway, then that's an issue we litigate in court. Okay? We always tell people, am I detained? Am I free to go? Okay? There was a question after the live, we did this last year, what's the difference? When you're detained, it's almost akin to a Terry stop. Terry versus Ohio is the case. All right? The officer has to have reasonable articulable suspicion that criminal activity is occurring or is about to occur. And they have to have the facts to articulate that. Okay? And the officer is then, in what they may sometimes call an investigative stop, allow a brief detention to either confirm or dispel what he or she is trying to investigate. Do you still have rights? Absolutely. Because they're going to ask you questions. You can decline those questions. Okay? You can decline the questions. My advice to you is, as you decline the questions, it's not what you say in those situations, it's how you say it. Okay? I'll give you a scenario of a young man that was watching the NBA Finals recently. He figured the game was already at his game, so he decided to go home. Officers pulled him over because they ran his lane, said he didn't have insurance. He had insurance. We fought that in court. Okay? The problem was, that's the misdemeanor. And as the troopers inquired of him, he became very hostile. Right? And I understand what he was trying to do, how he did it mattered. And for officer safety at 10, 11 o'clock at night, I want to actually come on the vehicle so we can talk to you. And then he's refused. And it got to the point of a physical takedown. The position is, I didn't do anything wrong, Tank. Okay? But you did. Because you fought with a lawful command by an officer, fully marked patrol vehicle. He's in uniform. He's like, he and she had identified themselves. And now you're telling them that you're not getting on the vehicle. A lot of people think on the R&O statute that you have to physically fight with police. You just have to not do what they say. Whether you agree with it or not is not to fight on the street. You fight it in the court. Okay? And so that's generally how we see it. So if there's no criminal activity occurring, to directly answer your point, and you decline the consent search of your person and or your vehicle, you're going to get in the little bit of a fact-specific analysis on the search of your person, because a Terry pat down for officer safety is very rarely going to be a challenge, in my opinion, in my experience. Okay, and I've challenged a ton. All right, because they often invoke first touch, plain touch doctrine. Okay, and if the officer in experience recognizes that there's a firearm, and you have to declare that firearm, that's a problem. Okay, if you don't have a CPL, that's a problem. Okay. But if there's no criminal activity occurring and your vehicle, your person is still searched, the question in my mind is, then what happened next? Because if there was nothing there, then you're probably being released and you're sworn, right? There's probably no charges coming. If we're in that scenario, the officer is now articulating why he or she is doing what she's doing, and then they find something, then I have to get, as we get into the Fifth and Sixth Amendment, what did you say? What did you do? What did the officers see? Okay. A lot of times we like to jump straight to the suppressive remedies, fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. That's not always readily accessible because you have to understand the most important moment in time, which is how did we get here? Okay. So a lot of people like to just jump, well, they violated my rights, that should be suppressed. Maybe. But that requires a fact and case-specific analysis. Okay? That's search and seizure in a nutshell. All right? Fifth Amendment. A lot of people say this all the time. They had me in a patrol car, they violated me, they didn't read me my rights. All right? Fifth Amendment protects individuals from being compelled to get witness against themselves. In a criminal case, as people will often say, I plead the fifth. And it also grants us the absolute right to remain silent, right? And that's what people are talking about when they go through Miranda. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court of law. You have the right to the assistance of counsel, Sixth Amendment, right? We'll talk about the right to the counsel when we get to the Sixth. Exercise your right to remain silent. Exercise your right to remain silent. Very few times people have talked themselves out of criminal charges. Very few. Exercise your right to remain silent. Facebook Live, silent. As a defense attorney, one of the most difficult things to deal with is what an individual says to law enforcement. Okay? Because of the rules of evidence, that becomes a party admission. It's not hearsay. When we talked about the confrontation clause in the Sixth, that's not hearsay. It's what you said. It's coming in. Okay? Now, I can't fight with what you said. So many times I get people that will tell me bits and pieces of the story, and then I get reports, and then body cams, and then I have to show them what they said and why that's a problem. Okay? We never find ourselves in that situation if you exercise your right to remain silent. Okay? So when you talk about self-incrimination, the government can compel you to testify against yourself. Okay? They can't make you take the stand in your own trial against yourself. All right? As defense attorneys, we love to say we don't carry the burden of proof. Okay? When charges and accusations are being made, I don't carry the burden of proof ever in a criminal trial. Okay? There are times where I do put forth evidence to show an alternate theory of the case as to why the government's theory can't be as they're offering. But you don't have to testify against yourself. You have a right to testify. When you think of the trial context or felony examination context, you have a right to testify. But understand, once you take the stand, it's your statements, right? And so that can open you up to some things, but you have the absolute right to remain silent. The government can't use that against you. The jury cannot use that against you, according to the black letter law. Okay. Now, from a practical standpoint, there are times where jurors and judges want to hear what was going on in the defendant's mind. Okay. They can't use that against you. All right. All right. So when we talk about they didn't read my rights, officer arrests you For example, following a domestic dispute, they put you in a patrol car and they say, well, what happened? It's not a violation of your rights. You can decline by saying, I don't want to make a statement. Okay? If you're in a traffic situation, and you get in a car, or a patrol car, and the officer has you in handcuffs, that is not what they call custodial interrogation. Okay? I have read the case law till I'm black and blue in the face because I believe that that is custodial interrogation. I am not free to go. I am seized at that moment. I am clearly not going home. And that's when I have to exercise my right. And so if the officer asks me a question and I voluntarily give them information, I am waiving my rights. Okay? Custodial interrogation, if I can try to get as black and white as I can get, it's when the officers, if you ever watch the first 48, they have you in that room.
Yeah.
Okay? Now you're in custodial interrogation. Okay? That's when we start looking at an analysis of the circumstances regarding the sufficiency of the statements, if any were given. But if you're roadside and an officer just asks you or make an inquiry, generally the courts aren't going to call that a custodial interrogation, and they don't have to read you Miranda. Okay?
They don't have to read you.
They don't have to read you Miranda rights.
And what situation?
If you're roadside and the officer says, what happened? Let's say there's a domestic dispute going on. Let's say there's a fight. Let's say the officer suspects you of operating a vehicle while intoxicated. Okay? Or just see you and just make an inquiry. And the officer say, hey, what's going on? I decline to answer those questions. Okay? Because I'm exercising my right to remain silent. Now, if I say Susie and Johnny was fighting and then Johnny tried to hit me and I hit him back, now you're making statements. Okay? Now you're making statements that could potentially incriminate you. Okay? So, the best advice I can give you, exercise your right. Okay? Now, I'll let you all be the deciders of when you choose to give statements or not. There may be times that you decide it's okay for me to give a statement. It's my desk. I'm probably going to say I wish they had given this statement. Because you can give me the statement for context, and we can go report a fight case. That's where we need to be. Okay? Sixth Amendment. I need a lawyer. So now you feel like you've been searched, you feel like you've been seized, officers are asking you questions. In some context, you've been informed of Miranda warnings. I want a lawyer. All right? Sixth Amendment protects the rights of the accused in criminal trials, including the right to legal representation, the right to a speedy trial, to circle back to a speedy trial, notice of accusations, confrontation of witnesses, and the compulsory process of obtaining witnesses to testify. So when we talk about the right to legal representation, we've already talked about that. I believe Gideon versus Wainwright is a case that guaranteed the right to counsel for individuals in the criminal system. The right to a speedy trial. I often see this, and we've seen this a ton during the pandemic. My speedy trial rights were violated, so my case has to be dismissed. Case law may suggest otherwise. That's a whole other topic for another section. But you do have a right to a speedy trial. Understanding that any delays in a speedy trial haven't been a result of the defendant's counsel. I need additional discovery, I need time to interview witnesses, things of that nature. That will toll those speedy trial rights. But that's a separate conversation for a different day. Notice of accusations. When you think about how a criminal process occurs, there's a decision to make an arrest, or there's a decision to investigate, pending further investigation, and then charges are thereafter issued. And the first proceeding that starts is the arraignment. So if an officer is going to arrest you roadside, why am I being arrested? They have to tell me. Okay? At a minimum, when you get arraigned, the court will often say to counsel, do you want me to read the charges? Now, if the attorney hasn't had opportunity or sufficient time to discuss the nature of the charges, then you read them into the record. Sometimes that will be waived because we know what the charges are. Okay? But you have a right to know what you've been charged with. All right? And it's the criminal complaint. That's what start proceedings. And then, whether it's a misdemeanor and or felony, you have a right to confrontation under the Sixth Amendment Crawford. You have a right to confront your accusers. You said that I hit you, then you have to come to court. And we have to go through that process. Okay? We have to go through that process for the trier of fact to make a determination beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed and I, in fact, committed that crime, or vice versa. Okay? And then the compulsory process, you often see that in trial phase, material witnesses, people that may not want to testify, but they gave statements to law enforcement. And so you do have, or attorneys do have, the subpoena power in an effort to get individuals to come in court and testify. I already hit the question, but I wanted to. One of the things that, just a few cases that we should know. We've already talked about Gideon versus Wainwright, the 1963 case. Pennsylvania versus Mims, the 1977 case. And again, I encourage people to take a look at that case because probably 90% of my traffic-related offenses that escalated to something different have underpinnings that implicate Pennsylvania versus Mims. I'd probably say 75 to 80% of those cases escalate to a police officer assaulting, resisting, and obstructing charge. Misdemeanors into felonies because we don't know that case in particular. All right, Pennsylvania versus Mims. Pennsylvania versus people. I'm sorry. M-I-M-M-S. Pennsylvania versus Mims. People versus Me was a 2019 case. So if you're a passenger in a vehicle, do you have standing, what we call it in a moment? Do you have the right to challenge the nature of the stop, the search, the conduct that's now occurring following the stop? Pennsylvania versus Mims was essentially a case where there was a passenger that had a backpack in a vehicle. The vehicle was stopped, the officer searched, and the officer said the driver gave consent to search my backpack. You can't do it. Okay? You cannot do it. Person A cannot give consent to search the property of person B. Okay? Thinking of a case where the young man was charged with police officer assaulting, resisting, obstructing. Officers suspected that he was in a home. And they came and they knocked, and there was voices heard in the room, and I believe ultimately the officers did breach the door. We fought that case, okay? And when I had some discussions with the government, my issue was, he doesn't own that house, he doesn't live there. He can't give you consent to go into that home, okay? And so ultimately that case did resolve in a very favorable way for us. But you talk about challenging searches and seizures and stops and violations of your rights. The first question you have to ask, do I have legal standing? Okay? I can see something being done to any one of you. I don't have standing to challenge it as a civilian. Okay? I only get to the challenge once we get into the court. All right. Riley versus California was a 2024 case. As we see the advent of technology continue to increase, officers can't just pull you over, take your phone and search it. They cannot. They need a warrant. They need reasonable suspicion. They need probable cause, and they need a warrant. Unless you give consent. Okay. And then Miranda versus Arizona, 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court, long-standing precedents, again, codifying the right against self-incrimination and the right to the assistance of counsel. Those are just some brief cases. Attorneys, every time we get cases, go back to the case. Go back to the case law for judicial interpretation and how it applies to the facts of our cases. At a minimum, you have to understand how to assert your rights. I did see, for those of you that haven't had a chance to look at the Public Defenders handout, I think it's a really good handout. It's got some really good literature. What if I'm not driving a vehicle? What if I'm not engaged in an altercation? What if I'm just walking down the street? right? And the officer pulls up to me and says, hey, I need to stop and talk to you for a minute. What basis do you have to stop? Right? And then you get into, again, analysis of the Terry versus Ohio, right? The officer has to have reasonable articulable suspicion that he or she suspects criminal activity is occurring, has occurred, is occurring, or will be. And the officer can only detain you for the time in which it's reasonable for them to either confirm or dispel. Am I under arrest? Am I being detained? All right. Once the officer says, I'm being detained, you know you're not going home. There's no point in fighting with him at that time. All right. The officer has already asserted that he or she has probable cause, that they made a determination to make the arrest, probably want to be allowed in Saginaw County Jail. What do you do after that can either stop where the charges are or add them. All right? I prefer they stop. All right? Because if we can challenge why this has already occurred, then we don't have to deal with the rest of it that comes after. All right? And again, Ms. Romo, what if they search me and I don't consent? And we challenge that search when we get to court. All right? We don't fight with them on the road. All right? We don't. I had a case just recently where the determination was being made to arrest. The individual was in handcuffs, okay, and they're being searched before being placed into the patrol vehicle. What's the point of fighting? Right? What's the point of fighting that thing? You just trying to trespass into a felony. Ordinance misdemeanor into a felony. Because the officer has to search you for officer safety at that point. The determination has been made to arrest you. And quite honestly, when they've made that determination to arrest you, it's in your best interest for them to search you at that point. Because if you go into Saginaw County Jail with contraband, and you don't declare your amnesty, you're getting charged. Right? And there have been times where individuals have had what would be not necessarily illegal, but contraband for purposes of the jail, and they're able to leave that at the scene. They're able to get that contraband to family members and friends who have now pulled up to the scene. Okay? I don't have to take that and get another 5-year felony. All right? Again, knowing your rights and knowing when and how to assert them. Some people will think that you have to be combative with police. You don't. I get it. There are some actors out there that are fully above board. I'll go on record saying that. But I also know that there are some officers that are trying to do the right thing. Okay? My blood gets a little boiling when I know I got a bad actor. Okay? But if I have a client that exasperates it, I gotta bring the temperature down a little bit. Because I gotta go into damage control. Okay? How you assert your right, what you tell police, how you interact with them on the street matters. Okay? There are times where we have good cases and then videos get played in court. You're sitting in court and you're, oh, I was afraid. But then we see the video, right? And then we see the video with all the expletives, right? And the actual struggle. It doesn't mirror what we're seeing in the court. That's persuasive to potential viewers. Okay? On that note, I would encourage our community to get on jury duty. We have a right to be on juries. We have a right to know and be able to stand in judgment of our fellow citizens. That's the only way this process can work. A lot of people don't want to be on jury duty, but we need people who understand where we come from.
Like, or how was that?
So
I
jury,
thought that was something they just like yelled to you.
it is, but what happens from a practical standpoint is when we get picked for jury duty, we ask all the reasons why we can get out of it.
Why is it like such a?
Less pay, if you have a full-time job, like, and it's, you don't know how long you'll be out of work, and things
Trials
like
can
that.
go 2 days, trials can go a day, trials can go a week.
And you have to go.
And some people are afraid to be on jury duty. Some people don't want to stand in judgment of other people. Okay, and there could be a host of reasons why, but I encourage us to be observant. All right. So with that, I'll field any questions that we have. If you got any questions on the line, let me know.
I have one that's kind of current. I don't know if you saw the happenings at Birch Park Apartments where they had some criminal activity out there, some incidents that happened, and in response to that, the city, and I don't know if this is this is your expertise or anything, but just wondering what you think of the legality of them now putting like license plate scanners and stuff like that out there, and now really around the city, like what's the legality of that? That's kind of one of the things that I'm fighting, to be honest. So I'm wondering legally, like, what's the standing?
So I don't know a lot about the particular situation that you're talking about, but let me just try to extract this a little bit. From what I hear, the contention is they shouldn't be able to just scan our license plates, right? And then the second thing that I hear is there is criminal activity occurring out there, right? I don't think there's anything illegal about it. Here's why, and I have to find some cases and I'll send them to you, because I've read a few. Not necessarily about license plate scanners, but how is that any different than the Michigan State Police driving behind me and scanning my license plate? Right. The Supreme Court has already said that's law enforcement function. Okay. From a practical standpoint, if there's criminal activity occurring in an impoverished neighborhood, do we want them to be safe? How do we protect them? Because I have to anticipate that the next argument will be that nobody's doing anything about crime. And then there's an action being done to identify bad actors, and we don't want that. So how do we address the crime? That's more of a conversation.
Yes.
Do you have any like links or websites that will help me get more informed on more of the amendments? And I got pretty good notes already, but like when it comes to jury duty, how do I go about that? And after, like, say I'm in the car and you ask me questions and I'm going to the station, do I just ask for a lawyer? Do I actually call a family friend? Like, how do you go about that process? Or is there websites and videos and stuff I know we got to learn about that process?
I'm not a ChatGPT AI guy, but a quick Google search, I'm not telling my name. Right? But if you do a Google search, you can't put in your search bar, how do I assert my rights? If you give me the scenario that you had, number one, the Constitution is there, but for some, maybe not as clear or simple to read in terms of application. All right. So if you're operating a motor vehicle, there's a traffic stop that occurs, and you don't wish to answer any questions, then the officer in that instance is limited to the basis of the traffic stop. Okay. So if you're speeding, I decline to answer any questions. All right. Are there any guns, weapons, knives, and drugs in the vehicle? I decline to answer those questions. Why did you stop me? All right. The officer may go back to his patrol vehicle, give you the citation, his or her patrol vehicle, give you the citation for the speeding infraction. If he or she develops reasonable articulable suspicion that there's something more occurring, Pennsylvania amendment first kick in, he's going to say, well, let me get you to step out. If it escalates to something more, then it's probably going to get from a civil infraction to a misdemeanor, and we'll deal with that in court. Okay? Because when I get to court, my argument is pretty straightforward. Those questions have nothing to do with the civil infraction. So why is it escalating? Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. You also gave two additional components: the invocation of the right to a lawyer. And then you gave, can I call a family member? You don't have a right to call a family member. All right. If you get on the phone and start trying to call family members to a traffic stop, the The officer does not know who's coming and what he or she is going
No,
to do.
not in the traffic stop. When, like, say I'm arrested, I'm in the car, I'm now at the police station. What do I do from there?
You're at the police station or at the county jail?
Whoa, wherever they take you, I should be arrested. I've never been
That's
arrested,
okay.
so.
That's okay. So for lawyers, words have meanings, right?
Right.
Now they take you to federal. Now you're getting closer to custodial interrogation. You invoke your right to remain silent. You say, I want a lawyer. If you invoke your right to counsel and they sit you in the room for another 2 hours, don't turn around and say, hey, can I talk to you? I'm ready to talk to you. Okay?
Right.
Because then for the lawyers, then it's going to come into an analysis of, again, does the officer have to reread Miranda or have you now waived it? Okay? And I don't want you to make statements. Once you say, I want a lawyer, questions should stop. Okay? Questions should stop. And they either make the determination to arrest or let you go. All right?
Do you, I mean, maybe this is similar to what you're asking at that point. You say, I want a lawyer, the question stop. Like, do you, and this is probably more TV than anything. I want my one phone call, you know? Do you get that? Do you have that right?
So,
Cause, yeah, that's kind of what I mean too. So I've never, like, since I've never been arrested, like, how do you get in contact with an actual lawyer, especially if you don't have one? Like, would I have to call? And I bring my mom into a lot of things, like, do I call my mom? Lawyer, like.
I'm in jail.
there's been quite a while where I've seen a situation where someone has invoked the right to counsel and I have been allowed to contact them.
Right.
Okay. I don't think you're going to be in a situation where they're going to have you sitting there and nobody knows where you are. All right. So most times your family's going to know that you've been arrested. And if you invoke unequivocally your right to counsel, they're going to probably be taking you where they're taking you or letting you go. And you'll get your phone call when you get to your destination. But they're not going to hold you and just hold you without any communication with the outside world. I have a big problem with that. Okay. Any more questions? Any other lies?
Let me ask a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you have invaded, and someone has invaded in your privacy or that's stolen from your account, so I do I have to seal some of that information?
Like your bank account or something?
Yeah, it's account, yeah, like sometimes it's stolen from my account, like money. Yeah,
Embezzlement?
something like that.
Somebody's
Do I
taking
have
your money?
to contact a lawyer, you know, for that?
I'd be willing to talk to you more about it, but if
She suspects somebody.
If you're suspecting that a crime has occurred, you need to be found in a police report. If the officers, detectives thereafter investigate and find sufficient evidence that a crime has occurred or continues to be occurring, then they'll be sent to the prosecutor's office.
Okay, so that would be what, like a criminal?
That's a criminal charge, yes.
Okay.
Now, you do have a civil round as well, but from what you're describing, it might be criminal first, and your opportunity to be made whole would be if there is a conviction for the restitution. But you need to go to law enforcement first, if you suspect something like that. Any other live, Jeff? I don't want to miss the live this year.
Nothing that I've seen. But I have another question myself. Let me check. Nothing there. So we do juvenile justice work. You know, we've been kind of delving into that realm. I know you. I guess my it's probably going to be more of a one-on-one at a later date because I got a lot of questions. But what would you say the state of juvenile justice is? Like, what do you think the gaps are in that system? I don't know if you operate in that system at all, family court, that type of thing.
So when I do child and family work, I deal more so with child abuse and neglect. I've on occasion had some cases in the juvenile division in terms of delinquency. There's room for improvement. I'll tell you that, there's room for improvement. And again, my work in that space is limited to a certain geographic region. And a lot of that becomes philosophical ideas in terms of how government actors prosecute those cases, offer deferrals. I think there's a bigger issue that needs to be addressed, particularly with juvenile justice, and that's the supervision of our juveniles. Right? There was one case that I did have. The young lady was charged, and the government's position, in some respects, was, well, we're offering a deferral, we're offering a delay. It's no harm to her. I said, except for she hasn't committed a crime, right? So when you think about the deferral statutes, which gives us an opportunity, if the crime has been committed, an opportunity to keep our records clean. The Home Youthful Training Act, delayed sentence, spousal deferrals, family domestic violence deferrals, 7411 for drug crimes. And then gets sentenced to a term of probation. And the juvenile system has similar statutes. And if you successfully complete that term of probation, then the charge goes away. Sometimes we tend to call it the get out of jail free card, right? You get your one pass. Because sometimes, and particularly, there's a ton of juvenile reform going on because we understand the juvenile brain isn't fully developed to a certain age. And so I think there's some underpinnings in that as well. But there is some room for growth and modification and challenging statutes. I'd be interested to talk to you about that. I do believe that one of the things that tend to get overlooked is that we have young men and women committing violent crimes, right? How do we get to violent crimes without any intervention before them? Right? That's a philosophical conversation. I'm sure we will. Absolutely.
I do have one person, and I know that this is, I know there are separate orders to this, but with all the ice raids going on, I know they haven't entered Michigan yet. And I know there's a bunch of ifs and ands and buts. But say I sign my door and they're in uniform with warrants, but I have my own documents. What do I do from there? Are they allowed to pay me?
Number one, I don't do immigration law.
I know. Do I have to do my own research in this one?
Number one, I don't do immigration law. Number two, you'll find that attorneys are highly reserved when their matters are ongoing to give opinion. And the reason that we do that is because we don't want to misspeak. There's a lot of litigation going through the federal courts right now. Until the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land, gives us guidance on what's going on, we don't want to opine.
Right.
Now, the principles remain the same. Okay? ICE is at your door. Whether you open the door or not is on you. Whether they breach that door and then violate those same principles of exercising their right to remain silent remain. Okay? Those principles don't change. They're in the U.S. Constitution. This is almost identical to state federal constitution.
Right. Okay. And then this is a big if, but it's from video I saw it, and it was saying that they were coming, like they weren't in uniform. So if I have a truck of people come up saying we're ICE, but they're not in uniform, there's no papers, there's no nothing, I do have the right to, I want to say like defend myself.
Yeah.
And the right to defend myself, basically deny these people and call law enforcement, right?
Officers have to identify themselves.
Okay.
You have to know that they are officers.
So if they
So
say
if
they
they're
are,
in
but
plain
they're not.
clothes, is what you're speaking of,
Yeah.
they still have an ID.
Okay.
Okay. I know there's a concern that there are rogue people going out and doing things. Quite honestly, I don't know how to give you the answer today.
Okay.
Okay.
That one.
But from a basic foundational legal perspective, an officer has to know him or herself for you to know that they have the authority to do what they're doing.
And if they don't, I go out from there.
I'm saying. Any other questions? Did the PD's office want to offer anything about their resources?
I mean, I can, if you want me to.
Yes, please. Other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, hi guys, I'm Maria. I'm a social worker at the Saginaw Defenders Office. We get used to saying A because now we have an additional social worker as well, and Melissa, who does our community outreach. So one of the things that when Jeremy was talking, like that's like a clear cut scenario, right? Like when somebody, if you're given a command adhere to that command, don't cause more problems, do whatever. But if you're an individual who maybe has an underlying mental health issue, post-traumatic stress disorder, those simple commands don't hit you the same way as if you don't have those disorders. So somebody like me at a defender's office can help try to relieve barriers that stop people from being successful in the community. So if it is a situation like that, and you get your case, then I work towards trying to find out other ways, resources to help alleviate problems like that happening again, or finding the documents that we need to support that you have a diagnosis like that kind of explains why things led up to the point that they did. That was like the biggest thing that I felt kind of having a social worker in a defender's office can be beneficial for those situations that occur like that. Because that is our main goal, is like the well-being of the client. Whatever we can do to help things get better for that person and their family and their life is what we want to be able to do. I'm not a mandated reporter, so families don't have to worry if a social worker at the defender's office is included or asked to, give a consult or anything. We're not mandated reporters. We just want to link people with services, resources that are in their community, and hopefully make their situation better along with their criminal case getting resolved. So we do have these Know Your Rights triangles that I'll leave some with you too if you want.
Yes, please.
And then if you ever need more, just let me know. And also we have some brochures for the local resources too.
I was like that.
Yeah. But any questions for me? No. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeremy, so much for your presentation. Giving us some tidbits, giving our people, we have a few people online that are watching as well, so we appreciate all the nuggets of information that people can use to know your rights. You have to know your rights. And I know the one that I'll continue to carry, I know he said it last time, he said it this time too, exercise your right to be silent. If you don't take nothing else away from this, exercise the right to be silent. And so, does anybody have any other questions? Maybe something that came up, even after they sat down. All right. Well, I won't hold you much any longer. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
If we have a right to leave, no.
You do. You're not detained at all. What was?
Could you let me get you guys to sign in?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, if y'all can sign in for us, I appreciate it. I didn't know we had it. Other than that, thank you so much. Okay. You don't have it?
You gotta sign in, but I don't have no official.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all again so much. I appreciate it. And thank you all on Facebook for watching. We appreciate it.
Yeah. So you want me to give you like all of the that we have and then you
Hey, whatever you want to give us, man, we'll take it. Because we table a lot.